in international waters off Venezuela. 3 patrol vessels initiated fire on a lone U.S. Coast Guard cutter, and 18 minutes later, 2 warships rested on the seafloor. The following analysis reconstructs events minute by minute. November 5, 2024, 14:14 Atlantic Standard Time. USCGC Stone, a Legend-class national security cutter. 418 feet of U.S. maritime enforcement capability. Was conducting routine counter-narcotics operations. 67 nautical miles north of La Guaira, Venezuela. In the preceding 72 hours, Stone had intercepted 3 drug-running fast boats, seizing 2,400 kilograms of cocaine, a seizure valued at an estimated $84 million. Venezuelan authorities assessed the shipment belonged to regime-connected cartels and perceived the interdiction as a direct strike on revenue streams. What followed was a calculated decision by Venezuelan Naval Command to escalate. At 13:47 local time, Venezuelan Command deployed 3 Constitution-class offshore patrol vessels from La Guaira Naval Base, each displacing approximately 1,800 tons, and equipped with a 76mm automatic cannon, 40mm bow-mounted guns, surface-to-surface missiles, and standard coastal defense systems. Collectively, the 3 vessels carried roughly 183 sailors. Venezuelan commanders assessed the tactical situation as favorable. 3 warships against 1 Coast Guard cutter, a force demonstration intended to drive Stone from the area and reassert control over regional maritime operations. Stone was lightly armed in comparison. Her primary weapon, a 57mm bow-mounted gun, designed for law enforcement and interdiction missions, supported by 50-caliber machine guns. These systems proved effective at deterring and disabling small traffickers, but were neither optimized nor designed for sustained naval combat with multiple, heavier combatants. At 14:03, Stone's radar detected approaching contacts. The 3 Venezuelan vessels were on intercept courses at 28 knots, presenting identifiable military signatures. Range 34 miles. Time to contact approximately 47 minutes. Stone's commanding officer activated emergency protocols, broadcasting on international maritime frequencies, notification to U.S. 4th Fleet in Mayport, Florida, and a direct request for support. The nearest U.S. warship, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer USS Gravely, was conducting exercises approximately 112 miles northeast and would require roughly 90 minutes. If operating at standard transit speed, Venezuelan tactical assumptions remained clear and aggressive: close, harass, and compel. Withdrawal, an international incident that would be framed as Venezuelan sovereignty defended. Those calculations proved catastrophically flawed. At 14:14, the lead Venezuelan patrol vessel, Guamacudo, close to approximately 3,200 yards and issued an ultimatum via VHF: leave Venezuelan economic waters immediately or face consequences. Stone was operating in international waters, 23 miles outside Venezuela's territorial sea, and the American captain responded by asserting rights of innocent passage and refusing to withdraw. At 14:17, Guamacudo initiated warning fire. 3 rounds from a 76mm cannon impacted the water, roughly 400 yards ahead of Stone's bow. The warning rounds transitioned the encounter from a diplomatic standoff to an act of aggression. Stone's crew moved to battle stations. The 57mm gun crew prepared for engagement. Machine gunners assumed firing positions, and damage control teams prepared for casualties and fires. The tactical picture deteriorated rapidly. By 14:19, a second Venezuelan vessel, Jaguar Aparo, had maneuvered to Stone's starboard side. A third vessel, Tamanacaco, covered the port approach. Stone was effectively bracketed. Combined displacement of the 3 hostile vessels totaled about 5,400 tons, with collective firepower capable of sinking an unsupported cutter within minutes. At 14:21, the engagement escalated significantly. Having received Stone's distress signal at 14:04, ordered flank speed, the destroyer accelerated to approximately 32 knots, closing the gap. Gravely carried substantial firepower, 90 vertical launch cells with Tomahawk and SM-2 missiles, and 8 Harpoon anti-ship missiles, capable of delivering 488-pound warheads to surface targets. At standoff ranges, for the immediate tactical situation, Gravely represented critical fire support that could tip the balance decisively. At 14:21, Guamacudo opened fire on Stone. A 76mm round struck Stone's stern at roughly 2,800 yards. The round detonated on deck plating, shattering communications equipment, and wounding 3 Coast Guard sailors with burns and lacerations. Damage control teams responded immediately, firefighting, shoring, and treatment of casualties. Stone's captain transmitted a mayday, reiterating that the cutter was under attack and sustaining fire. Venezuelan commanders tightened formation and reduced range to approximately 2,000 yards. Preparing for a potential boarding action, their intent was clear. Parading captured Coast Guard sailors on state television would have constituted a significant propaganda victory. What they did not know was that USS Gravely's Combat Information Center already had a complete picture of the battle space. By 14:23, Gravely's CO had received tactical data and obtained authorization for weapons release, if necessary. The lead time for a decisive response was brief. At 14:24, Stone returned fire. Her 57mm engaged Guamacudo, at its effective rapid-fire rate of roughly 16 rounds per minute, hits on the Venezuelan hull and superstructure ignited fires and degraded radar and sensor systems. But the 57mm rounds could not neutralize critical systems or sink a heavily built patrol vessel. The exchange favored the larger coastal combatants until heavier standoff weapons could enter the engagement. Yaguaraparo, et Fjorten, Sexotive, concentrated 76mm fire on Stone's midships. Direct hits caused severe damage. Windows and fittings were shattered. A lifeboat was destroyed, and a major galley fire ignited. Casualties mounted to 7 wounded. The medical bay was overwhelmed. Stone listed approximately 3 degrees to port and began taking water in damaged compartments. Damage control teams worked to stabilize the cutter and maintain propulsion. Meanwhile, Gravely closed to Harpoon employment range. At 14:31, the destroyer was roughly 66 miles from the engagement. Inside the effective Harpoon envelope, command determined target priorities. Guamacudo first, then Yaguaraparo, then Tamanaccaco. At 14:32, Gravely launched 4 Harpoon missiles. Each Harpoon accelerates on a solid rocket booster, transitions to sea-skimming cruise at roughly 537 miles per hour, and relies on an active radar seeker in terminal approach. Flight times and sensor timelines matter. The missiles crossed significant distance in minutes. At approximately 14:38 to 14:39, the Venezuelan crews first detected high-speed, low-altitude targets approaching. By that point, time to impact was measured in single-digit seconds. Alarms sounded. Crews attempted last-second maneuvers and defensive measures, but Tamanaccaco lacked integrated, close-in weapon systems or missile defeat capabilities. None of the 3 patrol vessels possessed effective anti-ship missile countermeasures. The first Harpoon struck Guamacudo at roughly 14:39, impacting at the waterline amidships. The warhead, approximately 488 pounds of high explosive, detonated within engineering spaces, destroying propulsion and triggering secondary fires. As fuel systems ruptured, a second Harpoon struck seconds later, obliterating bridge and command elements. The command staff perished in the explosion, and the ship's structure failed catastrophically. Guamacudo broke apart and sank within 90 seconds. Yaguaraparo attempted evasive action but was caught in the salvo. A Harpoon impacted broadside, lifting the hull and shattering the keel. The vessel capsized and sank in under 4 minutes. After successive impacts, that sequence destroyed 2 patrol vessels in rapid succession. At 14:39, Tamanakako's captain assessed the situation and took a different course, recognizing the overwhelming standoff threat and lacking the means to resist. Tamanakako ceased fire, hoisted a white flag, and cut engines. Gravely's fire control and weapons officers, having already authorized lethal action, assessed that additional strikes were unnecessary. 2 further Harpoon missiles in flight were redirected to harmless ocean impact points, roughly 2 miles beyond Tamanakako, salvaging lives while delivering a clear message. Stone, though damaged and with 7 wounded, retained sufficient propulsion and command to withdraw from the immediate engagement zone. By 1443, the cutter had moved clear, while Gravely dispatched rescue and boarding teams to recover survivors. And to secure the scene, damage control efforts on Stone succeeded. Fires were extinguished, and hull integrity was maintained sufficiently for safe transit. Reports indicate approximately 122 Venezuelan sailors went into the water. When the 2 vessels sank, rescue operations recovered 89 survivors. 33 Venezuelan personnel perished in the sinking. Tamanakako, the vessel that surrendered, had approximately 61 crew who were taken into custody intact. American casualties totaled 7 wounded, with no U.S. fatalities. USS Gravely arrived on scene in force, launched small boats, recovered survivors, and fulfilled obligations under international law to render assistance to persons in distress at sea. Irrespective of their status as combatants, the rescued Venezuelan sailors were subsequently processed, initial questioning, medical care, and transferred through diplomatic channels, followed in the weeks after the incident. From a cost perspective, the engagement illustrates the asymmetric economics of modern naval combat. Harpoon missiles cost approximately $1.2 million each. 4 missiles expended would therefore represent about $4.8 million in ordnance expenditure. The 2 Venezuelan patrol vessels were estimated at roughly $65 million each, making direct hardware losses weigh heavily against missile expenditure, not counting the human and political costs of 33 dead and 89 rescued. Operationally and politically, the consequences were immediate. 4th Fleet initiated a policy review and adjusted counter-narcotics tactics. Coast Guard cutters operating near Venezuelan approaches would no longer operate without naval escorts, capable of providing overwhelming standoff firepower. Future interdictions in that theater would thus involve destroyer or frigate escorts, shifting standard operating procedures from single-unit law enforcement operations to paired or task force deployments, designed to deter or immediately counter state-level military harassment. Stone was escorted to safety and onward to San Juan, Puerto Rico. Records indicate the vessel arrived on August 10th at 6. Repairs were completed and upgrades performed. Stone returned to service on September 15, 2024. The crew's wounds were treated at a naval hospital. All 7 wounded recovered and returned to duty within weeks. Venezuelan prisoners were detained, underwent military justice processing, and were repatriated via diplomatic channels. Roughly 3 months after the incident, Venezuelan command initially claimed the engagement was an unprovoked American attack. However, maritime tracking data and satellite imagery corroborated Stone's position in international waters and recorded Venezuelan vessels' approach and the initiation of hostilities. Tactically, this engagement underscores the decisive role of sensors, standoff weapons, and integrated fleet lethality in modern maritime warfare. Small patrol vessels, even when equipped with medium naval guns, lack survivability against supersonic or high subsonic, sea-skimming anti-ship missiles when they possess no layered air defense, no missile defeat systems, and no hardened command structure. The lesson is not merely a moral one. It is practical. Numerical advantage in hulls does not equal survivability. Against precision-guided munitions and robust fire control, training, doctrine, and industrial support, the ability to replace losses are also critical variables. Politically, the sunken vessels and the loss of life produced profound humiliation for Venezuelan naval command and for a regime that had sought to signal sovereignty and deterrence. Officers associated with the decision faced rapid courts-martial. Senior leadership sought scapegoats to deflect blame. The surviving domestic narrative from Caracas framed the event differently, but internationally, the recorded data and independent tracking told a clearer story. The Venezuelan vessels closed on a lawful, internationally operating U.S. cutter and fired first. Strategically, the incident had ripple effects across the region. Regional navies and Coast Guard services took notice. The calculus of confronting a U.S. cutter without credible anti-ship, missile defense, or allied support had real and immediate consequences. U.S. commanders emphasized that maritime law enforcement in contested zones operates in a gray zone between policing and combat. The more law enforcement assets operate in these spaces, the more doctrine must adapt to include fleet protection measures. Humanely, the engagement was fought by crews on both sides, making split-second decisions. Under fire, Stone's crew executed damage control, triage, and defensive fires. Under intense pressure, Gravely's crew launched a measured, decisive response, prioritizing protection of friendly forces while preserving life when possible. Venezuelan personnel, some following orders, and some possibly unaware of the broader political consequences, suffered loss and capture. International law dictated rescue obligations and subsequent processing of survivors. After-action analysis resulted in operational policy shifts. U.S. Coast Guard cutters would be accompanied by surface combatants in future operations near Venezuelan waters. Rules of engagement, communication protocols, and early warning procedures were revised to minimize risk and accelerate Allied response times. 2 patrol vessels rest on the seafloor, 67 miles north of La Guaira. Over time, reefs form and marine life colonizes metal, a literal and symbolic reminder of the cost of miscalculation. The analysis frames the event as an 18-minute demonstration that modern naval power projection can be measured in minutes. It concludes with a cautionary lesson. Smaller navies must account for the technological and doctrinal asymmetries they face, and maritime operators must prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. For the precise timeline reconstructed visually, Stone detected the approach at 14:03. Warning shots fired by Guamacuto at 14:17. The first damaging rounds at about 14:21. Stone returned fire at 14:24. Gravely launched harpoons. At 14:32, missile impacts, and the sinking sequence occurred around 14:39 to 14:43. Stone withdrew and Gravely recovered survivors, arriving to take control of the scene shortly thereafter. This incident shaped operational practice in the Caribbean and demonstrated brutally and conclusively that the combination of sensors, command and control, and precision missiles can utterly transform a localized encounter. For Coast Guard operations in contested maritime spaces, the operational doctrine now explicitly recognizes the requirement for lethal, capable escorts whenever cutters operate, where state forces might choose confrontation over cooperation.